Back to the Future is the rare movie franchise that ends with a proper conclusion, with Marty learning to be more confident in himself, Doc Brown learning the dangers of meddling with time, and the DeLorean time machine getting destroyed. Everyone's arcs are pretty much finished, and Robert Zemeckis has even said that under no circumstances will there be a Back to the Future Part 4. Of course, while there are no more movies, that has not stopped Universal from wanting to extend the life of one of the most valued properties, which is why we have the theme park ride and video games that continue the story. But today, I'm going to talk about one of the most interesting additions to the franchise, the Back to the Future animated series. Most popular movies in the 80s and 90s were turned into Saturday morning cartoons, so it was certainly inevitable Back to the Future would get that treatment. However, this was not a quickie show put together to make an easy buck off a known name. A lot of talented folks came together to put the series on the air, and put a lot of effort into those 26 episodes that were shown on CBS's Saturday morning block. First and foremost was Bob Gale, who wrote the entire Back to the Future trilogy. Wanting to differentiate the cartoon slightly from the movies and wanting to put more intelligent programming on television, he mandated that the show have an educational bent to it. That means the rebuilt DeLorean now allows Marty and the Brown family to travel to different locations beyond Hill Valley, thus giving the show an excuse to teach about world history. In fact, this DeLorean can do a lot of things its movie counterpart couldn't, which makes it a lot closer to the Gadgetmobile. Of course, there being a DeLorean in the cartoon kind of goes against the events of Part 3, as Doc was intent on destroying the car and was glad when it happened. It doesn't make a lot of sense why he built another one, but it would be odd if a Back to the Future cartoon did not have the DeLorean, so I'll let it slide. The other educational component came from the live-action bookends, featuring Christopher Lloyd reprising his role as Doc Brown, and Bill Nye the Science Guy before he was given his namesake television show. That was a nifty idea, although I don't know how many children watching bothered trying out the experiments. Curiously, while Lloyd did appear in these live-action segments, he did not do the voice of Doc Brown for the animated sections. I'm not sure why, but they instead got Dan Castellaneta, most well known as the voice of Homer Simpson. He does a decent job of imitating Christopher Lloyd, and David Kaufman was also able to replicate Michael J. Fox's voice for Marty. The characterization of Marty in the cartoon is a little strange though, as they make him more goofy and a bit of a prankster. Marty is also surprisingly gung-ho about using the time machine. After the events of the movies, you would think he would not want to go anywhere near that, and probably question Doc building another DeLorean. Even Doc is more relaxed in the cartoon. He made such a big deal about messing with the space-time continuum in the movies and not interfering too much in the past, but in the cartoon, he does not have a second thought about blowing up the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Mary Steenburgen did return to voice Clara in the cartoon, although the character was primarily written as just the typical mother and wife archetype. Thomas Wilson again played the various Tannins throughout history, and the writers came up with clever ways to incorporate his ancestors. Biff also became a prominent antagonist in the second season. He was depicted as the car mechanic he ended up becoming at the end of the first film, but made no attempt to hide his real persona from Marty and Doc when hatching his schemes. Marty's parents, despite being a focal point in the first two films, interestingly never make an appearance in the cartoon. George McFly not showing up could be attributed to Crispin Glover suing the producers over using his likeness in Part 2, though. A lot of the focus in the cartoon is on Doc and Clara's sons, Jules and Vern. We have the usual dynamic, with Jules being the brainy know-it-all, and Vern as the rambunctious troublemaker. A lot of episodes tended to involve one of them stealing the DeLorean to partake in some time travel hijinks, and either Doc has to go and save them, or the boys figure out how to get out of the situation themselves. You really need to do a better job of locking the time machine, Doc. Although he is surprisingly nonchalant at the end of the episodes. There's one story where Vern and Marty go back to World War II era Hill Valley, and Doc's reaction is just, "Aw, shucks." Another example of Doc's more flippant approach to time travel is an episode where he forces his family to go back to medieval times, see what life is like without electricity after they become too dependent on technology. Didn't he raise them in the Old West? And also, isn't he a scientist who uses electricity all the time? Hypocritical much? While time travel was a major component of the show, it was not always the focus of an episode. Sometimes they would be about a science experiment gone haywire, either through Doc's fault or Marty's or his son's. One episode has video game characters come to life and escape into the real world, while Doc ends up in a video game himself. To be honest, it felt more like an episode of the real Ghostbusters than what we usually associate with Back to the Future, and veered a little too far into unrealistic territory. And yes, I realize I'm saying this about a show with a time-traveling car. The humor of the show did put more of an emphasis on cartoon slapstick than the movies did, so your mileage may vary on that front. I feel the Back to the Future cartoon was at its strongest with dialogue and the character interactions, as well as depicting the various time periods. The show did avoid slipping into too much of a story formula common with Saturday morning cartoons of the era, and like Gale intended, there was enough respect for the audience's intelligence to tackle these scientific concepts. Like I said at the beginning of the video, a number of talented people had a hand in making the Back to the Future cartoon who would have notable careers later on. Peyton Reed, who would eventually make such films as Bring It On, Down with Love, and the Ant-Man movies, directed and wrote the live-action segments for the first season. This was not his first foray into the franchise either, as he previously directed a behind-the-scenes look at the trilogy and co-wrote the Back to the Future ride for the Universal Studios theme park. Bud Luckey, who had already proven himself a talented animator on Sesame Street and would soon serve as a character designer for several Pixar films, was a storyboard artist on Back to the Future. Another Pixar vet, Bill Cohn, was a key layout artist and designer on the show. And John Stevenson, the director of Kung Fu Panda and Sherlock Gnomes, did character designs. Watch the end credits of a cartoon you watched as a child, and you might be surprised at the names that pop up. Despite the popularity of the Back to the Future movies, the animated series just did not seem to take off, and CBS only ordered 2 seasons before removing it from the schedule. It mostly existed in the memory of those who did tune in or got the episodes on VHS. And then a curious thing happened in 2003, when the show suddenly reappeared and started airing reruns on Fox's Saturday morning block, mainly to fulfill the FCC's educational programming requirements. Of all the series of educational content, why did Fox specifically choose to dust off Back to the Future? I'm not really sure, but that was actually how I first came across the show. In the end, I think Bob Gale's decision to add the live-action demonstration segments was a smart one that allowed it to stand out from the other animated series based on movies. The cartoon itself is an interesting watch, even if the continuity does not entirely fit with the characterizations and themes of the trilogy. If you are a Back to the Future fan, the show is worth a curiosity viewing. As Doc Brown says at the end of every episode, see you in the future!